There's room at the cross for you. And we'll be singing that at the close of this lesson. And you may be here going through some very difficult times, and you may need help because you wonder why your life is so difficult. People are having difficulties in their lives and in their relationships, and we go to God when we have problems, and maybe He has an answer. Maybe He has three answers of why life can be difficult and why it is for so many people. We're going to investigate three this evening. But when we think about life being difficult, I want us first of all to understand that life is made of choices. Sometimes that's the problem. It's the character of our choices. To illustrate that in a very, very precise way, but not very short way, it's going to be building to showing a great point, I think, of what happens in life, and we could be looking at it from a perspective, as we will at the end, and say, well, why are they having such a difficult time? And we're going to lead up to that and give an answer, because we're going to look at Eli. We're going to look at his family and understand that there are things that we do in our life or choices that lead to situations that happen. The first point that we're observing there is, why do you honor God in offerings, in your giving? You say, well, that's just a minor thing. But when you look at Eli's family and look at 1 Samuel, the 2nd chapter, his sons, Phinehas and Hophni, they're ones that are not respecting the sacrifice of God. Won't you remember that when people offered sacrifices, they come to the priest, there'll be a portion for the priest, but the fat of the sacrifices always be offered first to God. Notice how that's being turned around. In chapter 2 and verse 13, the custom of the priest with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest servant came with the flesh was boiling, with a flesh hook and 3 teeth in his hand. He struck it in the pan and kettle and cauldron or pot. All that the flesh hook brought up, the priest took therewith. So they did in Shiloh unto all the Israelites that came hither. It says, yea, before they burnt the fat, the priest servant came and said to the man that sacrificed, give flesh to roast for the priest, for you'll not have this boiled flesh of thee but raw. He said, and if a man said unto me, if they will surely burn the fat first, that's what a man would say. God gets that first. That's the meat, that's the portion of the sacrifice for God. Let him have his part first. Then take as much as thy soul desireth. They're allowing, if you want this, take it, but let's give God first. And they say, nay, but thou shalt give it to me now, and if not, I will take it by force. And the sin of the young men was very great before Jehovah, for the men despised the offering of Jehovah. One of the things that's going to happen in this reading of these first 4 chapters of Samuel is that we're going to go from Eli's family to Samuel's family. And you're going to see, well, Eli's son's doing this, but Samuel's doing something else. And the choices that those two families make are very instructive. But here is sacrifice. You know, God has told us about our offering. In 2 Corinthians 9, 6, and 7, we read that we're to give bountifully, and we're going to receive bountifully. If you sow sparingly, you're not going to receive bountifully. Be a cheerful giver, number 2. That's the character of our offerings. That when we offer our money to God on the first day of the week, do we do that liberally, bountifully? Do we do that cheerfully? That's the character of giving. No, we're not offering up a lamb or a goat, but we're offering up spiritual sacrifices to God to take care of His work. When we sing songs of praise, do we do that wholeheartedly, understanding the significance of it all? Do we honor our marriage vows? Back to Eli's sons. We pick up in 1 Samuel 2 and verse 22, Eli was very old, and he heard all that his sons did in all Israel, and how they lay with the women that did service at the door of tent of meeting. Can you imagine that happening near the temple among God's people? It did. And Eli's sons were involved in doing that. You know, God told us that we need to be respecting marriage. Let marriage be had in honor among all, the Hebrew writer says in chapter 13 and verse 4. And here it was what he was doing, dishonoring those vows. He's a married man. And he was committing adultery with the women at the temple. That's kind of how the priest was. That's kind of what they were doing. In fact, in verse 30, he's despised by God. Therefore Jehovah the God of Israel saith, I said indeed that thy house and the house of thy father, as he is dealing with Eli, he says, should walk before me forever. But now Jehovah saith, be it far from me, for them that honor me I will honor, them that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. That's how God looked upon them. He didn't esteem them very highly. You say, well, how could that work out in life? To make those simple choices. I will honor my marriage vow. I will pay attention to the character of my sacrifices. But that becomes very important in life. Do you examine the character before you marry them? Do you examine the character of the one you are going to marry? There's a choice you make. Is this, well, they just sweep me off my feet? Don't think about what their belief system is. They don't think about their character. Don't observe that too much. But you consider marriage to be honorable before God. You look at the character. What were these men like? Chapter 2 and verse 1, we see the character of Samuel's family. Hannah prayed and exalted God, and she gave honor unto God. She wanted to have a child by God, and she was involved in dedicating that child. She made choices there. But we see in verse 16 that here, chapter 2 and verse 12, Eli was base men. They knew not Jehovah. Verse 16, if a man said it, if they will surely burn the fat first, I'm going to get it before God does. Verse 22, we see that he was committing fornication at the temple. They were greedy, they were selfish, they were fornicators. And you want to marry that person? One lady did. She made a choice. Does it matter about the character of the person that you marry? In Ephesians 5:22-33, that marriage that is orderly, that is joyfully, is built upon the character of godliness toward God, and example followed by the husbands of how they treat their wives according to the example of Jesus. That a wife is submitting to her husband as unto the Lord. Godly character is so important. And I hope young people, when you're thinking about marriage one day, you'll look at the character, because life gets real difficult when you make choices that are going to be different from this. What about the discipline of your children? Eli, he was upset with what his children did, and yet he didn't do anything to restrain them. Verse 24, he speaks to these sons who are greedy and selfish and not leading the people the way they should with the sacrifices, committing fornication. He says, name my sons, for it's no good report that I hear, that you make Jehovah's people to transgress. If one man sin against another, God will judge him. But if a man sin against Jehovah, especially the priest, who shall entreat for him? Notwithstanding, they hearkened not to the voice of their father, because Jehovah was minded to slay them. God's behind the scenes with our choices that we make, but he's already ready to slay those sons. And they're just making choices to do what they want to do. Eli made a choice. Eli is going to complain. He's going to say, this isn't good, boys. This isn't good of what you're doing. But we look a little bit later when God's going to bring judgment upon Eli. Verse 13, I told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knew, because his sons did bring a curse upon themselves. They will face the consequences of their actions. And he restrained them not. There is discipline that is needed in raising children. We love our children when we discipline them consistently and betimes, as the Bible says in Proverbs 13:24. If you spare that rod, you do not love your children. It's the character of the parent that is seen there. You don't love them. You say, well, spare the rod, spoil the child. That's not what the Bible says. It's the character of the parent that's being expressed. You don't love them because you're not restraining them. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of the child, Proverbs 22:15. But that rod of discipline drives it far from them. They learn, that's not the route I need to go. That's not the way that I need to go. And we make choices, parents, with how we're going to raise our children. We're not going to drive them to anger and where they give up and lose hope, but we're there guiding them, but we're there bringing them up, the chastening and the admonition. There's the warning, and there's that rod of discipline of the Lord, Ephesians 6:4. Do we complain about our children, but don't do anything about it? The discipline part. Those are choices we make. Did that affect your life? Life can be difficult when we ignore that. Do you live a holy life according to the Word, or do you just rely upon symbols? I'm a Bible believer. Have the Bible here, got it rebound, and it looks nice, and it folds real nicely. And sometimes that can be a symbol of who we try to say we are. Is it real to you that you look within its pages and you realize, I'm going to live according to the standard and live a holy life? Do we do that? Or is it just a symbol? I tell you what the Ark of the Covenant was to Hophni and Phinehas. It was just a symbol. Because here they're living the way that they wanted to. In chapter 4 and verse 3 and 4, and when the people were coming to the camp, the elders of Israel said, wherefore hath Jehovah smitten us today before the Philistines? It's because we didn't have the Ark of the Covenant here. That's the presence of Jehovah. We fought some battles, and the Philistines, they understand that, and we just need to bring that Ark of the Covenant into the battle. Let us fetch the Ark of the Covenant, Jehovah, out of Shiloh, and it may come among us, and save us out of the hand of our enemies. So they went to Shiloh, and they brought from thence the Ark of the Covenant of Jehovah of hosts, who sitteth above the cherubim. That's good. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were with the Ark of the Covenant of God. Yeah, the guy's committing fornication near the temple. The guy that is base doesn't even know God, and yes, he's offering priestly sacrifices. That's who you got in charge of that ark? Oh, but the Ark of the Covenant is a symbol. It's a powerful symbol. We'll defeat the enemy if we have that. Well, it scared them. It scared them. We pick up in verse 8, woe unto us, who shall deliver us out of the hand of the mighty gods? That's the Philistine camp. They are asking, who's going to deliver us? They're frightful because they hear the Ark of the Covenant, and the people really kind of feeling a lot of courage because of the ark's with them. He said, these are the gods that smote the Egyptians with all manner of plagues in the wilderness. Be strong, the leaders say. Quit yourselves like men, O ye Philistines, that you may not be servants unto the Hebrews, as they've been to you. Quit yourselves like men and fight. So here comes the Ark of the Covenant. We know what it did. God delivered them from Egyptian bondage, and here we are, the Philistines. And are you going to take that next step? And the Philistines say, be strong, be men, be of good courage, fight. And boy, they did. And the Philistines fought, and Israel was smitten. And they fled every man to his tent. And there was a very great slaughter. For there fell of Israel 30,000 footmen. And the ark of God was taken, and the two sons Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas were slain. When we think about the Word of God, we're to be servants in 2 Timothy 2:15, not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. That truth is cut straight. We're going to apply it to our lives as it is written. We're to put away all filthiness. an overflowing of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word which is able to save your soul. Is that real to you? Oh, I'll keep on sinning. I'll keep living the life I want to. I'll go to Bible study and it won't make much difference to my life. No, we can't do that. But those are choices we make. And all of the Ark of the Covenant was just a symbol. And God exposed it that day. And I'm asking you, do you live a holy life, or is this Christianity just a symbol? It sometimes has an effect on our lives. But you look at Samuel. Samuel was one that was doing a very hard thing. He was receiving a message from God, and it was very hard for him. He loved Eli. Now, 1 Samuel, the 4th chapter, in verse 15 through 19, is that I want to come back to chapter 3, and we'll get to chapter 4 in a minute. But chapter 3, verses 15 through 19, God's going to destroy Eli and his family. And he's told now Samuel, here am I. And he tells him this. And Samuel lay until the morning and opened the doors of the house of Jehovah, and Samuel feared to show Eli the vision. Then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son? And he said, here am I. And he said, what is the thing that Jehovah has spoken unto thee? I pray thee, hide it not from me. God do so to thee, and more also, if thou hide anything from me of all the things that he spake unto thee. And Samuel told him every whit. He was afraid, but he's going to cut the word straight. He's got a message from God. And it hurts him to have to say it, but he will. And Samuel told him every whit. He hid nothing from him. Of course, Eli's response, it is Jehovah. Let him do what seemeth good unto him good. Samuel grew in the midst of all of the darkness of Eli and his family. Here we got Samuel coming up. We're going to talk about Samuel now. He grew, and Jehovah was with him. He did not let one of his words fall to the ground. Every prophecy he made came true. It didn't fall to the ground. It was fulfilled. Being a prophet was not just a symbol. It wasn't just a prestigious place of honor. And sometimes the message he had to deliver was not very easy. But he delivered it because he's a prophet of God. The message of God is not just symbolic. It's real. And he was totally different from Eli and his particular family. So here we come to one day. And when we do, we come that the ark is captured. All the Philistines fight. They captured the ark. Hophni and Phinehas are dead. They died that day in the battle. God been wanting to kill them for a while. But the day came when Eli's sons are dead. It breaks Eli's heart that the Ark of the Covenant is taken, and he hears about the death of his sons. He was an old man, overweight. Well, let's just call it what the Bible says. He's fat. And he fell over with the news, and he broke his neck with the weight of his body. And that's not all that happened that day. See, Phinehas' wife, he's married, you know. His daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child, near to be delivered. And when she heard the tidings that the ark of God was taken, that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, so she's putting all this together, she bowed herself and brought forth, for her pains came upon her. And about the time of her death, she dies in delivering a son. It says, fear not, for thou hast brought forth a son. But she answered not, neither did she regard it. And she named the child Ichabod, saying, glory is departed from Israel. Why? Because the ark of God was taken. And because her father-in-law and her husband, she lost them all. The glory is departed from Israel, and indeed it is taken. If we were to hear that news and just came on the scene and just heard what happened today. One day it all came because of the choices we've been talking about that led up to it. It's captured. Ark of the Covenant not to be a symbol. You want to be two priests. They're not living holy lives. They're not offering sacrifice. They despise my sacrifices. They're not honoring their marriage vows. Eli, you haven't restricted them. Oh, they could have turned out the way they are. But what a sad day for Eli's family. He said, you know, some people just don't have very much luck. Their life is difficult today. Yeah. Life is difficult sometimes because of the choices we make that lead up to those things. Child named Ichabod, the glory has departed. Events come together sometimes. And this is a very dramatic way it did, due to the bad choices we make in life. And they may be insignificant, but we've got to make them from a godly perspective, so that we'll be indeed right with God. And what we begin to see is that what Proverbs 13:15 says, good understanding giveth favor, but the way of the transgressor is hard. That's what we're talking about tonight. The way of the sinner. It gets difficult. How come all these things happen to me? Well, one thing, would you look at the choices that you make? As we said, a contrast is happening with Samuel's family. We go back to 1 Samuel, the 2nd chapter, verses 18 through 21. Notice after Eli's sons and all the ungodliness that they're doing with the sacrifices, look how he comes up in verse 18, how the writer who puts these events together. But Samuel ministered before Jehovah, being a child girded with a linen ephod. We know he was a dedicated son. It wasn't easy for his mother. She didn't have a child. She wanted a child. She's praying unto God for a child. When she gets one, she dedicates him. After she weans him, she dedicates him unto God. And every year, she's bringing a little robe. And every year, they go up for sacrifice. Eli blessed Elkanah and his wife and said, Jehovah, give thee seed of this woman for the petition which is asked of Jehovah. And she has 5 more children. Oh, that family's blessed. But here was a family dedicated to their vows, dedicated to God, willing to, as a young man, to tell the truth when it would hurt the one he loved the most. And he did it. It's just a godly contrast and evil. And we can make those choices. And sometimes life becomes difficult because of the choices that we make. Secondly, life becomes difficult not because the choices we make, it's because where we live. Life is lived not on Mars, not on Venus. Life is lived on earth, but it's lived in the world. And here we look at the life of a Christian. You're going to live a holy life. It's not going to be a symbol. We're going to really be serious about the Word of God. You can expect life to be difficult sometime. When you stand for right and nobody likes it. But we need to understand the world that we live in. And the world that we live in is evil. Jesus says in John 7 and verse 7, he speaks about the fact that why they hate him, why the world hates him, because he speaks that its works are evil. The world doesn't like to hear that the works are evil. But he says that. The world cannot hate you, but me it hateth, because I testify of it that its works are evil. It's not that the world's not going to hate you, but it hates me first, because I am testifying its works are evil. Judgment has come in chapter 3, 19 through 20. I already know what the judgment is. People love the darkness rather than the light. They hate the light. They don't want to come near the light. So if you're being a light of the world, people won't be around you. If you live godly, you'll suffer persecution, Paul says, 2 Peter 3 and verse 12. If young people, you don't go along with the crowd and their drunkenness and their drinking parties, they will speak evil of you, 1 Peter 4 and verse 4. They won't want to be in your company. Oh, don't think anything strange has happened to you when that occurs. Peter reminds them, it's not something strange, it just purifies you in the life that you're living. But the glory of God and the Spirit of God dwells upon you. Let me tell you something. You can rejoice and you can have exceeding rejoicing moments, because as you are suffering, you're going to be partaking of God, the Lord, when He comes back again in His glory. Oh, you suffered with Him. We're going to be glorified with Him. And there's exceeding joy. Rejoice and be exceeding glad when they persecute you, because great is your reward in heaven. Peter is emphasizing that. The world does not honor the Christian. They make fun of it, make fun of the Christian, and they ostracize the Christian, and they may make life difficult for the Christian. So be it. We must be prepared for this. But I want you to ponder this, those of you who are not Christians. If the righteous are scarcely saved, Peter comes when, judgment has come to the house of God. People are suffering because they're Christians. But he makes ponder this question, and it's rhetorical in its nature. If the righteous is scarcely saved, where shall the ungodly and sinner appear? Probably not in a very good place. If this world and this life, we're going through judgment, where it is difficult, do you think their life's going to be easier? Where will the ungodly and sinner appear? If the righteous is scarcely saved. What he means by scarcely means difficulty. Doesn't mean I just barely make it. I'm so humble. I just barely make it into heaven. Oh, we need to be humble. I'll tell you, we grow into heaven. We don't just barely make it. And by the grace of God, we grow in the grace of God, so we don't fall. And that's not something we brag about. But this idea, I'm just going to barely slip in. Where do you get that? There'll be abundant entrance when we grow into salvation. The point is that here it is difficult while we live. There have been families ostracized from one another because people are Christians. There have been children ostracized by their parents because at a young age they obeyed the gospel and they didn't like them doing that. There have been difficulties in marriage because you're going to take the kids to services. I don't want them to go. And there's difficulty all the time standing for right. It's going to happen because we live in a very evil world. But the third thing that makes life difficult is not only that we make choices that come to a head sometime with difficulty in life. We live in a world that as a Christian will suffer the persecution. But here's a fact. Today we are living life longer. And we're living life to the point that we get to be old age, whatever that is. Some of you that are 30 think 40 is too old. When you're young, you think that's just too old. What's too old? But we're here. People are living longer. And that becomes something that we need to think about. Life can get difficult when we get older. Here's something to think about. The number of Americans that are 65 and over is projected to nearly double by 2060. Almost to 52 million. I probably won't be in that number, so don't blame me for the population explosion. 2060? But it's going to increase. People are going to be living longer, and more of them, to the fact that they're going to rise from 16 to 23% of people living 65 and older. It's going to increase. And just because we have that, reality in our lives. We need to get prepared for living to be an older age and realize that it's difficult. I'm trying to think why it is difficult. And what I have found out is that there's three things that we're talking about a lot of times in growing older. Let's talk about the issues with a man who, young, strong, middle age, we get to the older. The things that we perceive as being a man, being strong and can do things, not needing a lot of help from anybody else. Sometimes a man thinks he's losing his masculinity. He's not the man that he once was. And all of a sudden, life is difficult. That's not what I was. Oh, women are losing the beauty of youth, but they're not losing beauty. But they sometimes don't see it that way. Why do we at funerals show their younger pictures? See videos of when they're younger days. Oh, she's just a beautiful woman. Look, she's probably still beautiful. But the beauty of youth has gone. And those strong muscles and all those things that make a man in our image sometimes, in our minds, those become issues that you younger people don't have to deal with when you're young, because you're living that part of your life. Secondly, there's the fear of losing your independence. That's a reality. And those of you who are getting your license, you get your keys, and you have the freedom now to go places because you are able to drive on your own, you probably don't think of what it's going to be like sometimes when somebody has to take your keys away from you. And all of a sudden, life as you've known it changes. And that is a time when children have to make decisions, and it's never pleasant. It's difficult. But it's also a time where children requite their parents. They understand things, but they're going to be there to help them when it is indeed difficult. That's what 1 Timothy 5:4. That's the way God planned his thing. How long you live, I don't know. But there comes a time when the parents need your help. And there you are, young people. Children, grandchildren, 1 Timothy 5, verse 4. Requite. It's time to pay back, because when you were not able to get around, they took you. They held you. They fed you. They changed you. And you may have to be involved in that as older people get. There'll be that sense of difficulty because I cannot just do what I want to do when I want to do it. And I'm telling you, that is a big thing when you grow older, to lose that. And it's not because of anything you've done other than you've just gotten older. And losing the energy of youth, I used to do that. I used to be able to do this. I used to be able to get on a roof and nobody's worried about it. Everybody's worried about it now when you get older. And for good reason. But you lose that and it becomes a very difficult part. And maybe a lot of this we bring on ourselves, but that's a reality. Changes have happened. Life is changing. And sometimes it can be very difficult just because we're living longer. I want us to see what God has to say about this. Would you turn with me to Psalm 71. Because this is an inspired psalm, but it's also written by an old man. He's old now. And I want us to think about, when we think about growing older, here's a reality check. We're not dealing with, maybe this way it ought to be. This is reality. When the psalmist says in verse 9, "Cast me not off in the time of old age. Forsake me not when my strength faileth." That's exactly what it is, isn't it? Our strength is failing. Don't cast me aside. In the time of old age, that's when your strength goes. That's just reality. Nothing to get upset with. It's something to face and it becomes very difficult. When you look at Ecclesiastes, in chapter 9 and verse 8, the first part of the passage, "Forsake me not when my strength faileth." The first part of that, "Cast me not off in the time of old age. Forsake me not when my strength faileth." We see a picture of old age in Ecclesiastes, the 12th chapter, in verses 1 through 8. When he is encouraging the young man to remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come. Evil days. What would those evil days be? I think it's just a picture of growing older. But you have some more problems that you used to not have. Let's see if we could pick up the imagery. When he says, "Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after rain." You get over one problem and you're going to have another one. You get over one sorrowful event, maybe a funeral, and you got another one to go to. Clouds return after a rain. I wish I had some more sunshine. No. You're getting older. You get old, and these events happen in your life. In the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble, your hands shake, when they used to not be that way. The strong men shall bow themselves, and the grinders cease, because they are few. You lose your teeth, and you're bowed over. And those that look out of the windows shall be darkened. You don't see like you used to. The doors shall be shut in the street when the sound of the grind is low. You don't hear. Of course, events are coming with death in a few moments, but the sound of grinding is low. When one shall rise up at the voice of a bird, and all the daughters of music shall be brought low. You can't hear, but you can't sleep soundly either. You rise up at the voice of a bird. Oh, this crazy rooster that crows at 3 o'clock in the morning around my neighborhood. You wake up. And all the daughters of music shall be brought low. They shall be afraid of that which is high. Terrors are in their way. You should just jump over that and jump over this and get around that. Now you stump your toe on something that's in the middle of the room. Why don't you pick up your feet? It's kind of hard to do that. It didn't work the way it used to. I tell you, you're not going to get on a very high ladder. Terrors are in your way. And the almond tree shall blossom. If you have hair, it'll turn white. That's the color of the almond tree. Blossom. The grasshopper shall be a burden. Desire shall fail. Because man goeth to his everlasting home. And the mourners go out the streets. All this separation that happens in death. Kind of has a pretty picture here, but it's there. The mourners are going out in the streets before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is broken at the fountain, and the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returneth to the earth as it was, and the spirit returneth unto God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. All is vanity. It just flees by. Remember, he's talking to young people. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Because if you get some of the things that you have when you're older, you get some of the aches and the pains, you go through the difficult life of going one funeral right after another, you go through one sad story, one sad event of people that in your peer group, and you go through that day in and day out, you may be raising your fist to God. Say, how come, God, you did that to me? The evil days may cause you to never remember God. You'll curse Him because difficulty is there. But He's telling reality check, these things are going to happen. And maybe we need to take the refuge in the Lord instead of taking refuge in talking about our troubles. I can rely upon God. Point 2 is leaning upon God who giveth us hope. As we go back to the psalmist, what he says in verse 5, when he speaks about of taking refuge in verse 1 of the psalm. Verse 5 we read, For thou art my hope, O Lord Jehovah, thou art my trust from my youth. I'm old now, but you've been the one I've trusted in for all this length of time. Don't leave me now. Well, we need to lean on God. He's given us hope. Thou art my hope. It's not old age. It's not my hope. It's not the events of this world. It's not my hope. God, you are my hope. I think older people need to spend time of understanding that with God. Paul says the outward man is decaying, but the inward man is renewed day by day. Renewed day by day. Why is that? The body's decay is getting older, things are happening. That's not pleasant. But the inward man is because I'm looking at the things that are not seen. I'm looking at eternal things that are not seen. And this burden is just going to have an eternal weight of glory in comparison to what I'm going to enjoy. You spend time thinking about that. And leaning on God. And taking refuge in Him, not talking about our troubles. It leads us to speak to God more and more. As you pray to God, think about His greatness. Maybe we eliminate some of our problems. There'll be less remembering of what we're going through sometime. I think it would be helpful. Verse 6, it says, By Thee I have been holden up from the womb. Thou art He that took me out of my mother's womb. My praise shall be continually of Thee. I'm going to be consistent in praising You, O God. And maybe I won't be thinking so much about my troubles, because I am in tune with the God I take refuge in. And the praise of God is not only going to continue, but get this for old age. In verse 14, I will hope continually, and I will praise Thee yet more and more. That sounds like somebody's young. That sounds like somebody's got some energy. That sounds like somebody's going to increase. Yeah. You're going to increase in your praise to God that got you here. It'll get you through your troubles. And sometimes when it's easy for us to murmur, we might want to think about how we can eliminate it, because we don't want to be doing that. I'm not saying anybody here is doing that either. But older people do that sometimes. And then fourthly, we got a job to do. You don't retire from being a Christian because we get to be old. Listen to the psalmist. In verse 15 it says, My mouth shall tell of Thy righteousness and of Thy salvation all the day, for I know not the numbers thereof. I'm going to tell of Your righteousness, God. I'm going to speak to it. Well, you're going to talk to about it. O God, Thou hast taught me from my youth, and hitherto have I declared Thy wondrous works. In verse 17, Yea, even when I am old and gray-headed, I'm going to blossom time. O God, forsake me not until I have declared Thy strength unto the next generation thy might to every one that is to come. I'm going to talk to them about God when I have a chance. If I'm in a nursing home, they're going to hear about God. You got a captive audience sometime. I've seen some of this number talk about the beauty of older age. Mary Helen, she had men that came down that hall looking at her when she's in the nursing home, and she took advantage of that in a godly way because she was wanting to teach them the gospel. And I get in touch with them, and we had Osby's tracts. She's teaching Osby's tracts. I want to talk to people about God. We can do things when our situation is confining. And the moment we're in places like that, well, they're here this morning. When I get up, when I'm thinking about God, I want to praise you. I want to do it continually. I'm going to do it more and more. Well, you have fed your mind with God and praise Him that you will want to complain about your life at the breakfast table, at the lunch table. No. Oh, you'll have your troubles. But you're leaning on God. You have hope in God that strengthens you inwardly. And sometimes it'll help you get over those difficulties. Psalm 92 in verse 14, I think is a great psalm to think about when we grow older and get to be old age. Here's the righteous described by God. Verse 13, they are planted in the house of Jehovah and shall flourish in the courts of our God. And they shall still bring forth fruit in old age. What? They will be bringing forth fruit in old age. They shall be full of sap and green. You need to grow to be sappy old people. I like sappy old people. Oh, energy's not as strong as it was and all of those things, but that heart's there. And he's saying that that's the righteous. You can bring forth fruit according to your own ability. And if we focus upon that, in our moments of darkness when we are feeling bad because we've lost this and lost that and can't do this, can't do that, go to God. Talk to Him a lot. Forsake me not when my strength is gone, O God. I want to do more and more praise unto you. And help me get through the remaining years. Help me to be full of sap and full of fruit. I think that's a great thing to close on when we close out our life. Difficulties are there because of choices, because we live life in a world and we're living longer. And yet God is there to help us. He's given us some information that can help us as we grow older, knowing that it's just a stage before we get into being with God forevermore. In Revelation, we read about the time where there'll be no sickness and no sorrow, no pain. And the glories of heaven are being set before us in chapter 21 of Revelation. But one of the things that presses me is because when we think we have young, middle age, old age, and we get to having to go to these funerals. Spoke to a lady in Kansas City, tears in her eyes because of the sickness she's having to endure, and like the good days are gone. And we go to the funerals and funerals and funerals. We think that's all that's left. God makes an interesting point here when He speaks about there'll be no mourning or crying. In verse 4, because the first things are passed away. Your life, you got older, you died. Those were the first things. A door is open to eternity. And when we know that eternal weight of glory that's waiting there, we can go through our persecution as a Christian. We can go through the difficulties making godly decisions and dealing with our failures in a godly way, and even growing older. Because these are just the first things. We got eternity in a glorified state where no death, no pain, no sickness, all the things we're complaining about in life will be no more. It's not the end. This is all there is. No. For the Christian, that's just the first things. If you want to start that life of a Christian, we want to encourage you. There's room at the cross for you. Jesus died for you. There's always room for one more. And if there's someone here that realizes, I want to get right with God, I don't care if you're young or whether you're old, it's time to get right with God. And we're here to assist you. Come, obey the gospel as we stand and as we sing.